Hey gang, I'm Josie from Spade and Anchor Creative. Today I wanted to pop in and share with you something that I usually only reserve for my clients when I offboard them, meaning as a logo and brand identity designer. When I offboard a client is when I hand them all their tons, multiple millions, no, not millions, but many logo files and extra branding marketing material files like business cards and social media graphics and all the like. And then I give it to them in a pretty zip folder, and once they unzip it, it's organized by tons of different folders, pretty intuitive how to use them. But then once you really dig in there and start looking at the different file types and the file formats, it can get confusing. So today I want to go over the top 4 file formats that your average small business would ever need to get their branding off the ground. So we want to learn which files to use and when. So I've broken it into the 4 main file types that if you had to pick the 4 that you could totally get away with and be absolutely cool with getting your branding and your small business off the ground, this would be them. So at the top of the list is an EPS file, and that's short for Encapsulated Postscript File. And an EPS file is what's known as a vector graphic. And what a vector graphic means in the design world is that it's a mathematical equation almost, like when you take a small little logo file. Let's say we're looking at a logo and it's really tiny and we stretch it out really big to fill up the screen, or maybe we want to throw it on a billboard, on the side of the highway. We don't want it to lose quality when we stretch it out. We want it to scale equally across the board and not sacrifice any quality. And that's what a vector graphic is. So a vector graphic, a vector for short, can be sized up, size small, always sized proportionately, let me remind you of that, but it will not lose any quality. It will not sacrifice print quality whatsoever. And it's basically a print-ready file that can be converted to any other file type. So if you only had one file and it was an EPS, then you'd be in pretty good shape. So it's really the most pure form of your logo or whatever design you're talking about here, and it's sometimes referred to as a working file as well, because a designer who's worth their salt would know really what to do with that, and how to expand it and build upon it and edit it if needed. So you will likely not have any need for this file type yourself, actually, which is interesting, but you should have it to pass this on to any other designers or printers whenever there is a request for your logo from an industry professional. So what does that mean? That means, say you want to print your logo on the side of a coffee mug, or you want to print some merch for your small business, like you want to do some t-shirts, whether it's screen printed just like a pocket square, or if you want it embroidered, or maybe you want it on the side of a water bottle, or you want it on a tote bag, or an iPhone case. You can get really crazy with merch for your business, but when you do that, you're going to have to find a printer that can do this for you. And most people can find a great economical printer online. There are several out there, and more often than not, they're going to ask for what's called an EPS file. So while this file type, you yourself as the client or the creator, depending what kind of software you use, you might not actually be able to open this file yourself, and that's absolutely okay, because the information is there, so it can be sent to your printer of choice, who will use it appropriately, size it appropriately, expand it or shrink it appropriately, as long as you just have the file itself. So again, you might not be able to open it, but don't fear, because the people who will need it the most will be able to do what they want to do with it. It's the most pure form of your logo, so it's a great file to have. And kind of equitable to that would be the SVG file. An SVG is short for Scalable Vector Graphic. So an SVG file is very similar to an EPS because it's also a vector graphic, can be sized up or down without sacrificing quality, but unlike an EPS, an SVG is primarily reserved just for screen purposes, for web purposes. You're probably not going to be printing an SVG file. An SVG file is actually, and this is where I'm going to kind of take a little bit of segue from what you see on screen here, an SVG file is a different color mode than EPS. And what that means is in the world of design, we have 2 possible scenarios of output for anything that we're working on, and that would be print or it would be screen. So maybe I'm designing something that will be printed, whether that's printed on a home printer just as like letterhead, or something that's sent out to print, hundreds if not thousands, i.e. business card, or it will just be used on screen, let's say for your website or for an Instagram post or what have you. So each of those two different print and web or print and screen scenarios have different color modes. Print uses what's called CMYK, and on screen or web uses RGB. Now some might debate, oh, well, there's hex codes and all this other stuff, and there's also Pantone, which is matching colors very specifically. We're not going to get into that. If you had to break it down into two parent categories, that would be the easiest way to describe it, would be print is CMYK and screen/web is RGB. So what does that mean for you? That means if you print an RGB based file like an SVG file, that you're going to be losing some of that vibrancy, because when you print a file that's RGB, let's say you print like a proof your designer had sent you, let's say, because more than likely a proof is going to be an RGB file. When I say proof, I mean like, here's the first pass of your logo design, or here's the first pass of whatever design I'm making for you. And then let's say you print that on your end from your home printer. It is going to look completely different. The colors of CMYK they cannot be the ink. It cannot be that vibrant as what you see on screen. It's just not, it's not truly possible. So just keep that in mind. So whenever you're working with print, you're going to want EPS. Whenever you're working with web, you can use SVG as fine too. So just a little caveat there. So if you're using the online editor such as Canva, it's one of my new faves. I was kind of against it as a design industry professional for almost 2 decades now. I just couldn't get on board with it. And now I'm just like, you know what? It is making the world for small business owners so much easier. It's a great tool. It's free. There's a pro version too, but it is free. And they're working so hard to keep expanding the offerings and the things that it can do, that it would be a shame to not mention it here, because it is just like a fabulous design tool. So highly recommend Canva if you're not already using it. And the point of bringing this up is that an SVG file can be uploaded directly into Canva. So then you can have an awesome version of your logo or whatever design type or design thing that you're working on is, and you can upload it into Canva, and you can size it up or you can size it down without sacrificing quality. So pretty cool. SVG is a good file to have. The next one is PNG. So PNG, unlike SVG and EPS above, a PNG, which is short for portable network graphic, is actually a pixel-based file type, i.e. rasterized graphic file. So pixel-based equals rasterized. They're kind of synonymous for one another. And what that means is, you've probably experienced this yourself. If you've ever had a file or a photo and you've tried printing a photo like that was really only like a postage stamp size, and you tried printing it like 8x10 or even like, 4x7, and then it just looked pixelated and it looked crummy and it just did not look good, that's because it's a rasterized pixel-based graphic and you sacrifice the quality by enlarging it. It doesn't have this mathematical essence to it like an EPS and an SVG, where it can't like reproduce itself proportionately. All it does is stretch out the pixels, and in turn you're losing quality. So sometimes maybe if you've been watching something on the internet and it's been like kind of a bad connection or whatever, and it looks pixelated, that's what that means. So you're going to drastically lose quality if you try to increase a small file to a larger size beyond its originally provided dimensions. And PNGs are not generally suitable for print because, like I mentioned with the color modes, PNG are RGB based, meaning that their color mode is for screen and for website. So it's not going to really reproduce well when you print it. Sure, you can use it and go for it and try, but just know that that little caveat is there, that sometimes the colors will look different. That's just the nature of design as a whole anyways. So use this version online for a smoother, crisper appearance than a JPEG file, which I'll talk about next, and I'm sure you all heard of a JPEG file, as it's a great file type for logos and text. So here's the best thing to know about PNGs. PNGs have a transparent background, allowing it to be layered on top of other graphic elements. So having a PNG version of your logo in an editor such as Canva, for example, is kind of neat because you can layer it on top of other things and you don't have this white box behind it. It's actually transparent. So if you have a logo with like 4 different colors, you're not going to have this white box behind it. It's going to be completely transparent. So it allows you a little bit of more flexibility with whatever you're ultimately designing using that file with. So just keep it in mind, best for screen. And it's great because it has a transparent background. And then that brings us to the last file type, which is JPEG. And this is short for Joint Photographic Experts Group. Believe it or not, it's so random. And just like a PNG, it's also a raster-based graphic, meaning it's pixel-based. And so because of this, you will lose quality when you enlarge it beyond its supplied dimensions. So this occurs when you stretch it out. So when you tried to print that photo that somebody emailed you and it just looked really, really crummy, that's why, because it is raster-based, it's pixel-based. So JPEGs do not support transparency. A JPEG file will always have a white box around it. So just remember that. So when you're layering things, if you're like, why is this white box here? It's driving me crazy. It's because you're probably using the JPEG version instead of the PNG or instead of the SVG. So all of these individual file types serve a purpose depending on what you're using it for. JPEGs are great for images. So let's say you have a designer that you're working with, or you yourself are building your own website. You will more than likely need a bunch of JPEG files, and you're going to need them to be sized lower. That can be a whole other discussion or video for another day, is that each of these file types have different file weights associated with them too. So that kind of plays a role in what's appropriate to use when, but for the most part, this is a good little Bible to go by as far as the top 4 file types. And then again, if you only want to have like one takeaway from all this, just remember that a PNG has a transparent background, great for crisp lines and for layering stuff, and a JPEG will have that white box around it. So I hope that was helpful in kind of breaking down the 4 main file types that can get your business off the ground and your branding up and operating at full capacity. And let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.